At my birthday, I planned to announce my pregnancy. Instead, he gave me a breakup note and walked out laughing. I just smiled. He had no idea what was coming. 2 months later, he was outside my house, drunk, and shouting my name. I had been with Justin for just over 3 years. He was charming and attentive. He actually made eye contact during conversations instead of constantly scanning the room for someone more interesting. Things moved quickly between us. By our 1-year anniversary, we were already living together in a tiny apartment we could barely afford. It wasn't ideal timing financially, but rent in this city is ridiculous no matter when you move. Our relationship had its flaws, but it felt steady. We shared the same vision. Buy a house eventually, travel a bit, maybe have kids someday. Justin always cared more about appearances than I did. He obsessed over the car we drove, the restaurants we dined at, and curating perfect Instagram posts. I should have taken that as a red flag, but hindsight is always crystal clear, isn't it? Anyway, about 4 months ago, I started feeling off. Morning nausea, constant fatigue. I took a pregnancy test just to rule it out. We had been cautious, but not exactly meticulous. 2 pink lines appeared. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at that little stick, like it was some kind of ancient code. I spent about a week processing before telling anyone. My best friend Barbara was the first. She brought wine to girls' night, and when I stuck to water, she immediately knew. She asked all the right questions. What did I want? How might Justin react? And practical things like insurance and maternity leave. It helped me sort through my thoughts. As for Justin, I decided to wait. My birthday was in 3 weeks, and I thought it would be the perfect moment. We'd already planned a small get-together at our place with close friends, and I figured sharing the news surrounded by people I loved would be special. Again, hindsight. The weeks leading up to my birthday felt strange. I was dealing with what should honestly be called all-day sickness and trying to hide it from Justin. He didn't notice, which I chalked up to him being busy. He'd been coming home late, glued to his phone, acting a bit distant. I figured it was work stress. My birthday was on a Saturday. I spent the morning setting things up while Justin went to pick up the cake, which somehow took him nearly 3 hours. Whatever. Guests started arriving around 6 p.m. Barbara and her husband, our friends Aaron and Sergio, my cousin Lana who was visiting, and a few others, including Maria, my college friend. The party was lively. Great food, plenty of drinks, my sparkling water disguised as a vodka soda, music, laughter. I planned to make my announcement after we cut the cake, and I kept catching Barbara's eye across the room. She'd give me these subtle, encouraging nods that made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Around 9 p.m., Justin tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. My heart dropped. Had he somehow found out? Was he about to propose? Steal the moment? He launched into this heartfelt speech about how special I was, how lucky he felt to have me in his life, all while locking eyes with me. Then he handed me a small, beautifully wrapped box with a silk ribbon. The room went silent. Everyone watched, some even recording on their phones. I thought for a split second that maybe it was a ring, and panicked about how a pregnancy announcement would land right after a proposal. I opened the box. There wasn't a ring, just a folded note. I opened it, puzzled, and read the words now seared into my memory. I'm leaving you. You're useless, and I deserve better. Your stuff will be packed by Monday. I looked up at him, thinking it had to be a twisted joke. But his expression had changed. Cold, distant, almost amused. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he said we were over. That it had been fun, but he'd outgrown me. And then he laughed. Actually laughed. A few people laughed too, assuming it was some elaborate prank. But Justin turned and walked out the front door without another word. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, note in hand, the pregnancy announcement caught in my throat, while everyone looked around in stunned confusion. Barbara was the first to react. She walked over, took the note from my hand, read it, and muttered that he was a complete bastard. Then the room erupted, voices overlapping with concern and outrage. And me? I just smiled. Not because I wasn't heartbroken, I was. Not because I wasn't humiliated. I absolutely was. But because, in that moment, I realized something important. Justin thought he'd won. He believed he'd crafted the perfect exit, a public breakup where he held all the power. But he didn't know I was pregnant with his child. He didn't know I had found his secret credit card statements 2 weeks earlier, tucked away in a drawer while I was searching for a stamp. He didn't know I had already seen the texts on his Apple Watch when he left it charging in the bathroom. He really should have used two-factor authentication. Most importantly, he didn't know that I'm not the kind of woman who crumbles under pressure. I'm the kind who gets strategic. So I smiled. I thanked everyone for coming. I told them I was fine, I wasn't, and that they didn't need to worry about me. They absolutely did. I even sliced the birthday cake Barbara had brought and passed it around like I was celebrating a fresh start instead of grieving an ambush. Maria left almost immediately, claiming she wasn't feeling well. Convenient timing, right? Don't worry, we'll come back to her. The rest of our friends stayed a while longer. They helped tidy up, offered spare bedrooms, comforting hugs, even half-joking offers to help bury a body. Mostly joking anyway. By midnight, they'd all gone except Barbara, who flat out refused to leave. She insisted on staying the night, crashing on the couch no matter how much I tried to convince her otherwise. Once we were alone, the dam broke. Everything I had been holding back, grief, betrayal, humiliation, hit me all at once. Barbara didn't try to talk me out of it. She just held me and let me cry. No fake reassurances, no everything happens for a reason nonsense. Just presence. When the sobs finally slowed, somewhere around 2 a.m., I told her about the pregnancy. She didn't even flinch. Said she'd suspected something from the way I'd been acting lately. Then I showed her the credit card statements, charges for hotels, upscale restaurants, jewelry that had never reached me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through screenshots of messages sent to someone labeled M, full of heart emojis and secret rendezvous for nights I'd been working late. We both knew who M was, especially after Maria's little vanishing act at the party. We stayed up, talking until sunrise. We laid out options, made a rough plan. Barbara asked if I planned to tell Justin about the baby. I told her I would, eventually, but on my terms when I was ready. Not 1 second before. As for the cheating, the financial deception, I wasn't about to stoop to his level. No petty revenge, no public drama. But the truth? Oh, the truth would come out. All of it. Barbara looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration, noting that I could be a little terrifying when I had that fire in my eyes. I actually laughed, a real one, the first since opening that cursed box. That night, lying in bed alone for the first time in years, one hand resting gently on my still flat stomach, I made 2 promises. One to my unborn child, that I would give them a safe, stable, loving life, and one to myself, that I would come out of this stronger. Justin thought he ended our story that night. But what he didn't know, and what I've learned from countless true crime podcasts during laundry duty, is that the most effective revenge takes patience, precision, and a clear mind. And I had all 3. Next time, I'll tell you what happened in the days that followed. How I confirmed exactly who he left me for. Spoiler, no shocker there. And how his big dramatic exit didn't quite go the way he imagined. First update. Hey Reddit, Lily here again with the promised update. First, thank you, really, for all the kind, thoughtful comments on my last post. It's wild how strangers on the internet can show more empathy than people you've known your whole life. So where were we? Yes. The birthday disaster. Justin had just walked out in the most humiliating way possible, leaving me stunned and secretly pregnant, something only Barbara knew at that point. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and pancakes. Barbara, bless her heart, was still there, pretending it was any other Sunday while quietly checking on me every few minutes. She kept encouraging me to eat, obviously worried about the baby. I managed a few bites before the nausea hit. Morning sickness. Nature's little prank. Justin didn't come home that day. Not that I expected him to. It was both a relief and an aching kind of void. I spent the day ping-ponging between numbness and fury, drifting in and out of this strangely calm, hyper-focused mindset. I made lists, so many lists. Things I needed to cancel, documents to gather, doctors to call. It was like my emotions were being held at bay by sheer practicality. Barbara stayed by my side, helping me pack up a few of Justin's things. Not everything, just enough to make a statement. A quiet, unmistakable one. I wasn't waiting for him. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends rolled in, mostly supportive, concerned, and confused. Some were just fishing for gossip. And guess who didn't reach out at all? Yep, Maria. The one who dipped the second things got awkward. Then came Monday. Reality hit like a brick. I called in sick to work, which I never do, and made an appointment to confirm the pregnancy and talk through next steps with my doctor. Around noon, while researching tenant rights, our lease had both our names, I got a text from Justin. "I'll be by at 7 to get my things. Make sure you're not there." Can we talk about the audacity? I stared at the message for a solid 5 minutes before replying with a single word. No. No explanation. No discussion. Just a boundary. He called immediately. I hit decline. Then I called Barbara, and just like that, she started gathering the troops. By 6:30, my apartment was filled with friends. Aaron, Sergio, Lana, who extended her stay, and a few others, a living, breathing shield of people who cared about me. When Justin arrived right at 7, the look on his face was absolutely priceless. He hadn't expected witnesses, let alone a wall of loyal support. He tried to play it cool, demanded to know what was going on. But Aaron, towering at 6 feet 4 inches, built like a linebacker, stepped forward and handed him a single suitcase containing the essentials. Calmly, he told Justin that the rest of his belongings would be made available once he arranged a proper pickup time and demonstrated a little basic human decency. For now, this was all he was getting. Justin tried to catch my eye from across the room where I sat, composed on the couch. He started to say something about how this was all ridiculous and to just let him gather his stuff. I finally spoke, directly and evenly, telling him he should consider himself lucky I hadn't changed the locks yet, and that we could talk about the rest of his things once I'd had time to fully process his delightful little birthday stunt. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him cold. He picked up the suitcase and walked out, pausing only to mutter something about how I always needed an audience. Ironic, right? Coming from the man who dumped me in front of our entire friend group. After he left, I cried. Not for him, but for the life I thought we were building, for the plans that now had to be rewritten, for the child growing inside me who deserved more than a father capable of that kind of cruelty. The next morning, I called a locksmith and changed the locks. It was time for fresh boundaries. Now, about Maria. I'd had my suspicions ever since she left the party like it was on fire, but I didn't have proof. That confirmation came from an unexpected source. Sergio texted me Tuesday evening. He wanted to come clean. He and Aaron had seen Justin and Maria together a couple of months ago. They hadn't said anything at the time because they weren't sure what it meant. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe not. Sergio apologized for not speaking up sooner. It felt like getting punched in the gut, and simultaneously being vindicated. I had known Justin was cheating. I just didn't know who with. But to find out it was Maria, someone who'd sat at my table, eaten my food, smiled in my face, that betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. Still, I didn't confront either of them. Not yet. Maybe I've listened to too many true crime podcasts, but I knew better than to act without a plan. So I waited, watched, gathered more information. That week, I focused on taking control of the things I could. I confirmed my pregnancy, 10 weeks along. I consulted a lawyer about the apartment lease and our shared finances. Luckily, since we weren't married, there was no divorce mess to deal with. I froze our joint credit card accounts and opened new ones in my name. Small but critical steps to protect myself and the baby. What I didn't do was announce the pregnancy, not publicly, not even to friends outside of Barbara. It wasn't denial. It was strategy. I needed to get my foundation stable first. 2 weeks after the birthday ambush, Justin texted again. He wanted to talk things through and pick up the rest of his stuff. I agreed, on my terms. We'd meet at a coffee shop near the apartment. Neutral ground, public, broad daylight. When he walked in, I was struck by how much worse he looked. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes. I'm not proud of it, but I felt a little triumphant. He jumped straight into a half-baked explanation. Something about being unhappy, feeling stuck, wanting a clean break. I let him ramble. Then, calmly, I asked, "Is Maria making you happy?" The look on his face? Priceless. Like a deer caught in headlights. He stumbled through a few weak denials so transparent they were almost funny. I didn't let him finish. I told him I knew about the hotel stays, the secret credit card, the jewelry, bought with money we were supposedly saving for rent. I asked him just once, to be honest. He deflated right in front of me. Like all the air had been sucked out of him. He mumbled the classic line, "It's not what you think." I didn't even let him finish. I told him he could collect the rest of his things Saturday at 2 p.m. Aaron would be there. After that, I didn't want to hear from him again unless it was through my lawyer. His voice actually squeaked when he repeated, "Lawyer?" He tried to walk it back, said there was no need to get lawyers involved, that we could work this out between us. I kept my cool even though my heart was racing. I told him this was the natural consequence of his decision, the one he made so loudly and proudly at my birthday party. I was just respecting it. As I stood to leave, Justin reached out and grabbed my wrist, not forcefully, but with a kind of desperation. He asked about the apartment, specifically how I planned to afford it on my own, pointing out that my job barely covered half the rent. That's when everything clicked. This meeting was never about closure or collecting the rest of his things. It was about money. What Justin didn't know, or maybe chose to ignore, was that I'd been paying more than half the rent for the past year. His income had been drying up, his job less secure than he let on. He'd been living beyond his means, relying on my stable paycheck as a cushion while continuing to present himself as the provider to both our friends and, apparently, to Maria. I smiled at him, sweet but firm, and told him I'd manage just fine. I added that unlike some people, I actually save money instead of spending it on hotel rooms and jewelry. The way his face drained of color told me all I needed to know. He realized I knew everything. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in weeks, not because I'd won some petty fight, but because I had finally seen him for who he truly was. He was a man obsessed with appearances, someone who lied to seem more successful, more in control, and who abandoned me the second I no longer served the image he wanted to project. That Saturday, as agreed, Aaron supervised while Justin came to pick up more of his things. I made myself scarce and spent the day at a prenatal yoga class, which, by the way, I highly recommend to anyone dealing with stress during pregnancy. When I returned home, the apartment felt noticeably emptier, but in a way that made it more mine. That night, I started rearranging furniture, not just to fill the space, but to reclaim it. Over the next few weeks, I slowly settled into a new rhythm: work, doctor appointments, prenatal vitamins, careful budgeting. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actively building a new future, one that looked different than the one I had imagined, but not necessarily worse. As for Justin and Maria, their romance wasn't thriving. Word reached me. Okay, it reached Sergio, who heard it from his cousin that works at a restaurant where they often argued in public, that things were getting messy. Apparently, Maria was starting to realize the man she'd ended up with wasn't the confident, financially stable guy he'd pretended to be. The cracks in their relationship became obvious about a month after my coffee shop meeting with Justin. I was at the grocery store, comparing prenatal vitamins, when I literally bumped carts with Maria. Of all the people to run into. This time, though, she didn't act defensive. In fact, she looked relieved to see me. She immediately asked how I was doing, how the pregnancy was going, and she seemed genuinely interested. Then she did something that caught me completely off guard. She apologized. Not a casual sorry, not an uncomfortable half apology, but a real, sincere acknowledgement of the hurt she'd been part of. She told me Justin had fed her the same narrative he'd likely used with others, that our relationship was over, that we were just going through the motions, and that I was somehow holding him back. It wasn't until later that she found out I was still very much in the picture, and then, even later, that she wasn't the only one he was seeing. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We ended up grabbing a quick coffee, tea for me, and talked about everything. It was a surreal experience, but strangely cathartic. We both now saw Justin for who he really was, not some heartless villain, but a deeply insecure man who needed constant validation and would bend the truth to get it. Before we parted, Maria casually mentioned that Justin had been let go from his job 2 weeks earlier and thought I should know, since it might impact child support. I thanked her for the information and went home, filing that away with all the other puzzle pieces of this new reality. That evening, as I was folding tiny onesies and listening to my favorite podcast, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole, because you always check the peephole, and there was Justin. He looked sober but rough. I opened the door without inviting him in. He immediately launched into his usual frantic speech, said he figured I'd heard about the job, that it wasn't his fault, that he was being set up. Then he asked if I'd seen Maria recently, his voice tight with suspicion. I told him yes, that we'd run into each other at Target. His expression tried for casual, but ended up looking like someone battling indigestion and a panic attack at the same time. He asked what we talked about. I simply said, "You." He didn't like that answer. He grew agitated, accused us of conspiring against him, claimed that everyone was turning on him, and that he was just doing his best in a difficult situation. I reminded him calmly that this was his situation, one he created, and that playing the victim wouldn't get him anywhere with me. And then something unexpected happened. He broke down. Not dramatically, no shouting or sobbing, just a slump in his shoulders, a hollow tone in his voice. He said his life was falling apart, no job, no girlfriend, an apartment he couldn't afford, and a baby he had no idea how to be responsible for. For a brief moment, the old version of me, the fixer, the empath, the partner, wanted to step in. But then I remembered the words in that birthday card. "You're useless. I deserve better." Instead of comfort, I gave him clarity. I told him he had two options. He could keep spiraling and lose everything, or he could step up, take responsibility, and rebuild. For the first time in a long while, he actually listened. No interruptions, no excuses, just quiet, genuine listening. When I was done, he nodded slowly and asked if we could talk more inside. I hesitated, then agreed, but left the door open. Never fully close yourself in with someone unstable. We sat at my kitchen table, and he asked me real questions about the baby. Nothing superficial, nothing forced. Actual, thoughtful questions about doctor visits, about health, about delivery plans. And it hit me in that moment. I didn't love him anymore, not even a little, but I did want him to be okay. Not for his sake, but for our child's. Before he left that night, Justin promised to review the child support agreement and find a new job as soon as possible. And then, somewhat unexpectedly, he thanked me for not hating him, even though he knew I had every reason to. I told him the truth. Hate takes too much energy, and I was saving mine for more important things. That was the first time I realized he might actually be trying, in his own imperfect way, to do better. Not for me, but maybe for the baby. In the weeks that followed, subtle but noticeable shifts began to take place. Justin found a new job, not as lucrative as his old one, but more stable. He signed the child support agreement without a single argument. He even enrolled in a parenting class at the community center, which honestly floored me. We weren't friends, not even close, but we were no longer enemies either. As my due date crept closer, things weren't perfect, but they were functional. We had built a cautious co-parenting relationship grounded in firm boundaries and clear expectations. He came to doctor's appointments when I invited him, and when I finally admitted defeat with the crib assembly, curse you IKEA, he came over and helped put it together without complaint. Then, just last week, with me 7 months pregnant and officially waddling, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a simple, no-frills journal and a handwritten note. For your thoughts, plans, and all the true crime podcast notes you want to write. You were never useless. I was just too self-absorbed to see your value. I didn't respond. Some things don't require a reply. But I did start using the journal, mostly to write down this whole journey in real time, so that one day I can tell our child the full story of how they came to be. A story that's messy and complicated, full of pain and growth and human imperfection. Next time, I'll tell you about the birth itself and how Justin handled the reality of actually becoming a father. Because if there's one thing this entire experience has taught me, it's that people will surprise you, sometimes with their cruelty, sometimes with their growth, but always with their humanity. Last update. Hey Reddit fam, it's been a minute. Okay, more like several months, and I wouldn't blame you if you forgot about me entirely. Having a newborn kind of turns your brain into mashed potatoes, but I promised an update, so here it is. The baby's here. Little Zoe made her grand entrance into the world 6 weeks ago, weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her father's chin, which, let's be honest, is the only one of his features I'm not mad about her inheriting. Labor was intense. All those curated YouTube birth vlogs I binge-watched in preparation? Useless. Try 32 hours of contractions, no sleep, and a kind of pain that's hard to describe without swearing. The weirdest part is what I kept thinking about during those long, painful hours. Not about Justin or the betrayal or even the future. I thought about how far I'd come since that god-awful birthday party. 8 months ago, I was standing in my own living room holding a breakup note in front of a room full of stunned faces. Now I was in a hospital gown, screaming through contractions, and about to bring a whole new human into the world. Life comes at you fast. Justin actually showed up at the hospital for the birth. That alone shocked just about everyone, including me. He even brought this giant teddy bear that was so big it wouldn't fit through the door of my hospital room. Like, sir, this is a 1-bedroom apartment kind of life. Where did you think that bear was going to live? But he was there. He waited with Barbara, who never left my side, who talked me through every terrifying moment, who reminded me I was stronger than I felt. Justin mostly hovered in the background, scrolling on his phone, occasionally asking if I needed water or ice chips. It wasn't heroic, but it was something. He was trying. When Zoe finally arrived and they placed her on my chest, it felt like time slowed down. I had this flash of clarity, this sudden, overwhelming knowing that every heartbreak, every betrayal, every moment of doubt had led me to this exact second. And I wouldn't change any of it, not for anything. Justin cried when he held her. Not movie-perfect, graceful tears. These were messy, unexpected sobs that turned his face blotchy and made his nose run. It was the rawest, most genuine emotion I'd ever seen from him in all the years we'd known each other. And for the first time, I didn't see him as the man who'd humiliated me or failed me. I just saw someone who was scared, overwhelmed, and finally realizing what it meant to be a parent. The first few weeks at home were a blur of diaper changes, feeding struggles, and a level of sleep deprivation I genuinely didn't think the human body could survive. My mom came to stay for 2 weeks, which was both a blessing and a challenge. She meant well. She always does. But within 24 hours, she'd completely reorganized my kitchen because, in her words, my system made no sense. Apparently, putting colanders with pots instead of with strainers is a cardinal sin. I didn't argue. I was too tired, and honestly, at least she was cooking. Justin, to my surprise, has been fairly consistent. Not in a let me hold the baby at 2 a.m. way, but he shows up 3 times a week for scheduled visits. Sometimes he brings genuinely helpful things like diapers or dinner. Other times, it's the kind of dad energy you have to laugh at, like the tiny faux leather jacket he brought for 6-week-old Zoe. It was adorable, but also, sir, she will outgrow that before it's ever cold enough to wear it. Still, I appreciated the gesture. It meant he was trying, and trying, at this point, counts for something. Our co-parenting rhythm is still taking shape. There are tense moments, mostly when he cancels last minute or shows up late with half-hearted excuses about work. But then, there are moments that catch me off guard, Like the time I was quietly miserable with a clogged milk duct, and he somehow figured it out, Googled remedies, and showed up with cabbage leaves and a heating pad. If you know, you know. It was weirdly thoughtful, and not something I ever expected from the guy who once claimed almond milk was a conspiracy. Financially, we've found a fragile sort of balance. Justin has been paying his child support on time, so far, and I've started working from home part-time as a freelance social media manager. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not making me rich, but it's covering the basics. Sergio actually connected me with the job through his sister's company, and I've been able to get work done during Zoe's nap windows, on the days she decides sleep isn't a personal offense. My landlord even let me renew the lease in just my name without any hassle, which felt like a surprisingly emotional win. I painted the living room this soft sage green, and it's wild how something so small can change the way a space feels. It finally feels like mine. I still run into Maria now and then. It's a small city, and even smaller when you're both frequenting the same grocery store. It's not awkward anymore. More like bumping into someone from a college class you both barely remember. The last time I saw her, she was with a very bearded man who called her babe every few seconds. She seemed happy, though a little forced about it. I hope she is. Truly. We both walked through some fire, and if she's finding peace on the other side of it, good for her. Justin, on the other hand, is still struggling in some ways. According to Barbara, who heard from Aaron, who plays basketball with one of Justin's co-workers. Yes, the gossip network is alive and thriving. His new job isn't going great. He moved into a gloomy little studio apartment he complains about constantly. Sometimes when he comes over, I catch him looking around my place, and there's this flicker in his expression. Nostalgia? Regret? Maybe both. It's hard to tell, and I don't ask. We've both learned how to respect the space between us. The most unexpected twist in all this has been Justin's apparent personal growth journey. He mentioned in passing that he's been seeing a therapist. Yes, this is the same guy who once told me therapy was for people who just want to pay someone to agree with them. He's reading parenting books, too. Joined some dad group on Facebook. I'm not holding my breath, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious about who he might become on the other side of all this. Meanwhile, my own life has taken a few surprising turns. Remember the part-time social media job? It's been going well, and the best part is that I can do it in my pajama pants while Zoe naps next to me. The connection came through Sergio, who mentioned to his sister that I was looking for remote work. It's not a career-defining job, but it's a foothold, and right now that's everything. And then there's Eli. Yes, there's an Eli now. He was the delivery guy who kept bringing my grocery orders in those early, chaotic postpartum weeks. At first, he was just a blur in the background, a friendly face I barely registered through the fog of sleepless nights and milk-stained t-shirts. But then he started leaving little notes in the bags, stuff like, "This brand of wipes is what my sister swears by," or random dad jokes that made me laugh harder than they deserved. It was small, but meaningful. One afternoon, when I was particularly frazzled, hadn't showered in days, wearing socks that didn't match, pretty sure there was spit up in my hair, he asked if I wanted help carrying the water cases into the kitchen. I hesitated for a moment. Single mom rule number 1. Don't invite strange men inside. But something about him felt different. Calm. Safe. And so I said yes. As we unpacked groceries, we started talking. Turns out he's finishing his degree in environmental science and delivers groceries to help pay tuition. He has a younger sister with 2 kids that he helps out with all the time, which explains why he didn't seem fazed by the baby gear explosion that had taken over my apartment. We exchanged numbers under the pretense of future delivery issues, an excuse that neither of us believed, but one that gave us an easy way to stay in touch. It was a comfortable fiction, and we both leaned into it. Since then, we've been texting on and off. Eli's come by for coffee a few times. Nothing formal, nothing labeled. I'm not in a rush to leap into another relationship, not after everything, but it's been nice, refreshing even, to talk to an adult about something other than diapers, feeding schedules, or the eternal debate of whether sleep training is cruel or a godsend. Eli listens, makes me laugh, and doesn't make me feel like a walking burp cloth. That, in itself, feels like a miracle. Yesterday was my birthday. A full year since the night everything imploded. The note, the silence, the stunned faces. I thought I'd be haunted by it, but surprisingly I wasn't. I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Barbara and her husband, Aaron and Sergio, Lana, and a few other close friends who've stuck by me through every twist of this journey. Justin stopped by briefly to drop off a birthday gift, a delicate bracelet with Zoe's birthstone. It was unexpectedly thoughtful. He didn't stay long, and that felt right. As the evening wound down, I looked around my living room, still small, still a little cluttered with baby gear, but full of warmth. I looked at my daughter, asleep in her bassinet, her tiny chest rising and falling in that peaceful rhythm only babies seem to have. I looked at the faces of people who have held me together when I couldn't hold myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I didn't expect. Gratitude. Not just for what I have now, but for everything I had to go through to get here. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Eli will turn into something lasting, or maybe he'll just be a kind and brief chapter. Maybe Justin will keep evolving into a capable co-parent, or maybe he'll regress. Maybe I'll stay in this little apartment, or maybe one day I'll find a house with a yard for Zoe to chase butterflies in. I've stopped needing to know. What matters is that I'm not the woman I was a year ago, the one holding a cruel note on her birthday, trying not to cry in front of her guests. That woman was broken, but still standing. This woman? She's rebuilt herself, stronger in the places that cracked. She's not afraid to begin again. If there's any kind of moral to this messy, long-winded story, it's probably this. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is the beginning of the best version of yourself. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not easy, but it's possible. Oh, and for those who've been wondering what happened to that absurdly large teddy bear Justin brought to the hospital, it's currently doing excellent work as a barricade, keeping Zoe from rolling off my bed when I have to set her down for 30 seconds to pee. So, I guess it found its purpose after all. And the infamous breakup note? I kept it. Not out of spite or bitterness, but because it's part of the story. It lives in a memory box in Zoe's closet, along with her hospital bracelet, her first lock of hair, and the pregnancy test that started it all. One day, when she's older, I'll tell her everything, not to burden her, but because it's hers too. This story, as messy and human and healing as it is, belongs to her just as much as it does to me.